making a distinction here between performative art, like music, and art we want to live with. That was supposed to be our thing here. My son is a musician, and he's working right now on a sonata by Alban Berg. It's a super interesting piece of music. I really enjoy it, but when I'm cooking dinner, I don't want to hear that. That's not what I want on the radio. And the same thing for visual arts. There are visual artistic experiences that I have in a museum that I think are interesting and thought-provoking, and perhaps they help some artist release his or her pressure, who knows, but they're interesting, but I certainly don't want to live with them. And they give me intellectual pleasure perhaps, but not the sort of aesthetic pleasure that certain beautiful mobiles might give me living in my living room. The things you can live with and things you appreciate are not necessarily overlapping, and in the performative arts it's even more extreme. Nobody would want to invite an experimental theater group home to live with them, or at least not the experimental theater I've seen recently in Berlin. So I think we have to make a bit of a distinction between what we do for pleasure. As Moritz said, you enjoy playing your piano, but you probably wouldn't want to sit down at the Steinway in the Philharmonic and play for anyone else. It's something
I'm a scientist, not an artist, so I can just describe my feelings when I look, for example, at such a beautiful painting like this, or such a sculpture like this. So I have a lot of stress in my life, and if I sit here, the stress comes down, so it calms me down. I have a pleasant association with it. So I think it's a lot of to do with emotions.
Yes, if the artist puts the low part of the body into the artwork, you will get more
release.
Release, yeah, you get more release than from head, from brain, and this is
I think it raises a very interesting point. So the very same eyes and the very same part of the brain that you use during your day to analyze some kind of scientific data, whatever, or do an experiment, or read a book and heavily think about it. These are the very same eyes you're using now to appreciate this piece of art. And at least to a large part, as far as we understand, also a large part of the brain is the same part of the brain, so to say, doing this. So I think there is something important to realize. It's not like two separate things, but you are able to use the same system, your brain and all the visual parts of it, and the retina and everything that's connected, to create this kind of perception compared to everyday life where you may have to analyze numbers of rows of numbers or something like that. So, but in terms of the art view, I think this puts an interesting question. What are the patterns, what are the stimuli, we would say in neuroscience, that you use to allow that, to trigger your system that has been so overused possibly, as I know it also during the day at some point you're just totally, packed with certain thoughts. And still you're able to use the same brain later, an hour later maybe, and trigger emotions, trigger sensations, trigger things that you have not experienced probably during the day. And again, I mean, it's probably stimuli, at least at the beginning. I'm not saying there's no body and so on in the experience, but it is stimuli you perceive with the very same eyes.
I think of the notion of harmony in the following sense. We evolved in a particular environment, not in these concrete boxes that are actually used in solitary confinement. If you were to take away the tables and chairs and the art, and we don't like solitary confinement. So we humans evolved. We are pro-social. We evolved with other faces around us. We evolved with landscapes around us. We evolved with certain patterns of colors, textures in nature, and architecture, which is shaping our environment to live in. I think we naturally bring back those things which I think we are genetically predisposed to want in our environment. And I'm intrigued by this notion that artists, when they create the art that you're comfortable with in your kitchen and on your couch, are able to distill, because artists who are professional and skilled perhaps have even more of an ability to capture some things and present it to us. Even if I understood what is it that I want, I may not have the ability to present it even for myself. Perhaps they have the ability to capture from the environment that we live in be it figures, be it our bodies, be it colors, be it textures, be it forms, capture it, distill it, maybe shape it through their own bodies and thoughts, and present it. And then you like it because you always liked it. You liked it, it just because you are human in a way. And maybe there's cultural layerings on top of that. But that would be a hypothesis that I would put forward. It's a very biological hypothesis. It's saying that there are some things like that. Sorry.
When I walk into the studio, as an artist, I have to remind myself to let go of the mind process, to let go of the social input. I say to myself, don't give a fuck. And in that way, I sort of like drop everything. And so, in a way, I try to connect with, whether it's brain waves or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But I connect with what I would call my inner spirit, that inner being, whatever that is. And I think when you connect to that way and you drop all that other stuff, all that other crap, you start creating what I would call real art. And when you put that real art up on the wall that comes from in here and not from, I don't mean that in a negative way, but in that analytical way, what do the public want to see? You get rid of all of that. Then people like yourself come to that work and they connect with something. That's a spiritual something that is living within that artwork. And whether it's body, but it's not, maybe it is brain, it doesn't really matter. But there's a connection that starts happening rather than an analytical thing that, oh, this is in. Therefore, I should like
performance. I went to this New York Science Festival, had a session on creativity, and we had a brain imaging neuroscientist, Bill T. Jones, who's an actor, a Shakespeare actor. They all had their own notions of creativity. I have to say the neuroscientist had the least interesting thing to say about creativity because he put a picture of the brain and said, here's a spot that lights up when you're creative. That totally bored the audience. And when the other two artists stood up and spoke, they were communicating their creative process. Bill T. Jones kind of went into the mode that he is when he's dancing, or the Shakespeare actor said something, and his inner experience, as you said, was stripping away what was coming on, forgetting about the audience. That was interesting because it was the immediate experience of that person refined over time. And I tend to agree with you that if we overthink it, this is just my personal experience, not as a scientist, then we might lose it. On the other hand, for critics, it's
something that just is born.
It's the same thing. So it's a creative process where I can only put my brain in the right state and then wait.
Yes.
For inspiration to strike.
Still, it's just fascinating that I agree with what you said, obviously, because also I'm an artist. But when your work has evolved in the process of creativity, like you described, that by itself the work sparks something to another person in not exactly probably the same way, but very similar.
Yeah.
And what the spark is processed in the brain. So it's not the brain as a rational, pre-deciding machine, but it's still the experiencing of the brain, like with music, etc. And that's why, of course, like you said, the interest of maybe finding patterns in that gets us closer to understanding what experience in itself is. Because you can give it any label you like, which are all correct, free will, personal preference, spiritual, but in the end they're all processed in your biological organism. So it's not a mechanical way.
Could it be, let me phrase it as a question, could it maybe be that what you describe as your spiritual, or no, spiritual, you didn't say, I think you said your spirit or your inner core, whatever you get by dropping out the inner voice, that what you're doing there is that your brain as an artist's brain is capable of detecting patterns in the world and that we are all able to detect but not to create. So your brain is the one that's able, and you're maybe not thinking about your brain while you're doing it, sorry if I just may say that, and you may consider the brain the kind of rational thing, and that's why you don't want to call it brain, but let me call it brain. And just propose that you are able to detect and recreate or invent obviously things that then arouse certain things in almost everybody else, and that's what we're talking about, because we all are able to perceive, but you are able to create that. And when I say you, I mean your brain. So just as a way of phrasing this in a brain way that doesn't imply there's something mathematical doing it. It's obviously something very biological and very personal.
Yeah, but in that case.